It's a sad reality that most startups end up crashing and burning within the first few years after they're created. And each one of those stories is a unique journey. But there are 10 things that most startups have in common that cause them to fail. I'm going to walk through what they are, how you can avoid those traps, and at the end, I'm going to give a bonus item talking about how even the companies that survive can end up becoming undead zombies. Welcome to Feel the Boot, the science of startups. I'm your host, Lance Cottrell, and I'm here to help you climb that nearly vertical learning curve you're going to encounter as you launch your business. I know what it's like, I've been there myself, and I've helped countless other founders along their journeys. This episode is part of an entire series on running your startup. And I'll put a link, I think, up there so you can find all the other episodes on this topic. This episode and every other episode we make is also available as both an article and as a podcast, so you can listen on the go. I'll put links to those down in the description. There's a nearly infinite number of ways startups can go bad, but those largely fall into 10 general buckets. So let's go into those one at a time in roughly descending order of frequency. Number 1, not enough product need. This breaks down into 2 subcategories. The first is that the problem just isn't that bad. This is a matter of customer priorities. So your product may in fact solve a problem for these users, but they don't care that much. They have dozens of other priorities that are higher than this on their agenda. And so even if you gave them the perfect product at the perfect price, they probably wouldn't want to spend the time to use it and implement it because it doesn't make that much difference. It's not going to move the needle for them. And the other case is where the existing solution is good enough. So it solves their problem. It might not be perfect, it might not do all the things they wanted to, but it generally lets them get the job done. This is a fundamental problem for your solution. And really, there's no way around it. If you're doing your market research and find out that they don't need it that badly, or the things they've got work perfectly well, don't go into that space. I sincerely hope you're not watching this having already built an entire product and discovered this when you went to market, because there really isn't a way out of this other than a fundamental re-architecture of your business. You're going to need to pivot your way out of this particular pit. Number 2, running out of money. This may seem like an obvious tautology, but this is what kills so many startups. When you're running along trying to get lift, trying to generate enough revenue to be able to break out of the pattern that you're in to reach that next big milestone, but you're not quite getting there. Growth is slower than you expected. The money is slowly running out. And as the money runs out, the whole pinch gets tighter, right? When you're right at the end, it's very hard to raise additional funds. Right? You haven't hit the milestones you needed to. Investors don't want to work with you. You're needing to cut back and shrink your team to survive. That makes your customer experience worse, which hurts your growth. You don't have the money to spend on marketing to grow the opportunity. Right? Everything's going wrong. And when you try to do this at the last moment, it makes everything worse. Right? There's no way to go from 1 month of runway to 8 months of runway without truly radical surgery, like effectively firing everyone and stopping all activities, which puts a total halt to everything you're doing. The key here is you must take action early. As soon as you start to see that your growth projections you're not actually hitting your growth projections, that slope is not going to get you to the milestones you need before you need to be out raising that next round, and that next round won't get raised unless you have hit those milestones, it's time to adjust your plan immediately. Start readjusting. What's your burn rate? How do you get there? Can you do more bootstrapping? Maybe you even start raising earlier on some kind of a bridge to that next round. Go back to your existing investors if they're still excited about what you're doing. But you have to take steps now to avoid getting into that pinch where you're over a barrel, you're out of money, and you don't have any maneuver room to allow you to make other plans or pivot. You're just up against a wall. Number 3, gaps in the team. The team is the most important thing in a startup because it's highly likely that you're going to pivot. The details of your initial plan are going to change, often radically, but the people in that company need to be the core. And so you need to have the people who can do all of your core activities. Right? There's a lot of things a company needs to do, many of which are not core to the nature of your business. But some of them are. You need to make sure you've got those covered off. So if you're a highly technical organization, you're building out really complex software or doing really sophisticated hardware, you need people on that initial team who know that stuff. Or if you're mostly about brand and marketing, you need people who are genius about brand and marketing on that team. You shouldn't be building that company with just software developers, right? It's going to be a huge mistake. So you've got all of these different roles that people on the founding team need to have, things they need to do. I recommend that you set up a matrix to keep track of this and make sure you don't have critical gaps in your capabilities. So across the top of the matrix, list all of those things, the kind of engineering you need, the sort of programming skills, manufacturing, marketing, branding, customer relationships. Maybe it's even audience. People, you need for some reason influencer or someone with access into a certain area or reputation, a public speaker into the groups that you're trying to access, whatever it might be. List all of those out. And you might even mark them with some level of priority. How important are these items? Then down the side, list your initial team. Who do you got? And what boxes do they check off? Hopefully you're checking off a few boxes each, right? You want to have as much redundancy as possible. Then think about who else you could bring onto the team. Either by name, you know some people that you could try to recruit, or as sort of blank slates. We need a person like this. We need a person like that to make sure you've got the complete package. They don't all need to be co-founders, right? Those could be people you could hire. They could be people on the sideline who have committed to coming on full-time as soon as you're funded. A lot of ways to slice this, but make sure that you understand what it is you need and how you're going to get it by the time you need it to have that team that's going to succeed. Because if you're missing big pieces, then either the product doesn't work, you don't actually successfully go to market, you can't sell, you can't reach your customers don't trust you. Lots of ways things go wrong if you don't have the right people on the bus. Number 4, competition. Competition can kill you in a couple of different ways. And the first is you're just not sufficiently differentiated from the incumbents in the space. Because the incumbents are already in there. They already have those customers, they're already using that tool. Now you need to convince people to take on that switching cost, to go use a new solution, to retool, to change all of their internal processes. And if you're a startup, you're asking them to take a huge risk on a new company that may or may not be around in a couple of years, which is why people say startups' solutions need to be 10 times better, faster, or cheaper than the existing solutions. You can't be 10% better, people won't adopt your product. So be very honest with yourself about how you stack up against those other players and whether people would switch over to use you. And the other problem is fast followers. They're not competitors right now, but as soon as people see what you're doing and you're starting to get traction and you're beginning to get customers, you've now proved out that this is a viable direction to go. So why can't a significant existing player, someone well-funded with lots of resources, go jump in with your model, going after your customers and eat your lunch right away? The only answer can be building some kind of moat. And there's so many different kinds of moats out there, lots of sorts of strategic power. You could have intellectual property, you could have network effects, you could be building up an amazing brand. Right? There's a number of ways you can approach this, but be thinking about that honestly. Remember, the competitive analysis is not just something that investors are asking you to do because they want to see a pretty slide in your deck. And so you respond by putting together a long list of features that you picked because you get to check a lot of boxes that other people don't get to check. And so it looks good. You got a lot of green marks, they've got a lot of red marks, but that means nothing. What matters to your customers? What allows you to operate in this space? How do you stack up against these? And which of these are things that other people could easily duplicate? And which are things that you can realistically defend? And understand that whole picture for yourself, because it should be informing your entire corporate strategy. Right? If you don't have a defensible space in any way, shape, or form, or you're not enough differentiated from the other competitors that are out there to make people change, you need to be rethinking your business and your business model and the kind of solution you're offering now before you put in all the work to build it. Number 5, pricing problems. There are 3 ways that pricing can get you into trouble. The most common is the race to the bottom, when your main advantage over the competitors is that you're cheaper. And the problem is, this is a game two can play pretty easily. In general, your competitor can also reduce their prices, and if they're a large incumbent, often undercut you because their underlying cost structure is better than yours. And if your only advantage was price, now you need to drop it. If you're doing something disruptive that allows you to have radically lower costs than the incumbents, then you can be doing a lower pricing strategy. But lots of companies get killed with this race to the bottom that quickly squeezes all of the profit margin out of the business, and now everyone's just suffering, scrambling after pennies on the ground. Another problem is when you're overpricing. When you're trying to say this is a premium solution which can command a higher price, which will give us the kind of margins that we want to see in our company. And the question here is, do your customers really believe that? Do they think you're that much better than their other options that they'd be not only willing to switch, but pay more for the privilege of switching, right? It's super luxurious. It's a brand they want to be associated with. It has features or capabilities that they just can't get anywhere else, and they're willing to pay a premium for it. You're going to want to test that pretty carefully to make sure that your assumptions about that are correct. And the third is that there's a mismatch in the way you price and the way your customer perceives value. It's important that these be aligned so that when a customer is getting twice as much value, they are paying twice as much. Or perhaps more importantly, when you ask them to pay twice as much, they better be feeling internally that they're getting at least twice as much value from it. And the structure needs to fit with the way they want to pay for this, the way they want to experience it. Not every solution makes sense as a subscription, right? It could be a one-time purchase, although I'm not a big fan of those if you can get a subscription. It could be a pay-as-you-go model. It could be a capitated model for the entire enterprise based on the number of people in the company. It could be a number of seats. It could be tiered, but you want to make sure that it works with them and is easy to swallow. I've seen a lot of cases where the pricing, say there's a big price break at 100 seats. And so pretty quickly, all the customers make sure that they only have 99 seats on the platform. So spend some time talking to those customers and understanding that. And in general, explore pricing with your customers in a structured way. So not just saying, hey, what would you pay for this? Or would you pay this much? But try to box them in on this. How do they want to pay for it? Give them several options, ask them open-ended questions, and use tools. There's a number of tools for working out the best price for a solution. Things like the Van Westendorp price sensitivity meter is a pretty good one, and I'll put a link down in the description because no one can spell that, and you probably have no idea what that would be if you just wanted to type it in for my saying it. But this can help you avoid those pricing mismatches that can hurt your company. Before I move on to the second half of this list, I want to ask you to do me a favor, and you can probably guess what it is. I'd like you to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. It makes a huge difference to the channel, and it makes sure that YouTube knows this is the type of content that you want to see more of. But YouTube's not always great at remembering to show you new episodes, so I also encourage you to go to feeltheboot.com and sign up for our newsletter, Bootprints. I'll put up a card there and a link in the description. That makes sure you get alerted every single time a new episode comes out. It also has lots of additional content available to you, as well as giving you access to my free office hours. Speaking of office hours, if you go over to Feel the Boot, I have a number of options to get on my calendar if you need one-on-one help for your startup. I love working with founders. Number 6, failure to transition from prototype to full product. So you've got your MVP or beta product out there and people are loving it, you're getting great feedback, and now it's time to launch that 1.0 and start your big growth push, and then problems start to pop up. Maybe the speed starts to collapse as you get more users, or there's lots of bugs from the new features you're implementing, the stability issues, you're flying the fail whale every time you have to put up a screen saying that the service is not available at the moment. It can be tricky to move from that initial version to the final version. And I think the main reason is there is no such thing as a prototype anymore, certainly not in software. We're almost always building that MVP quick and dirty and iterating like crazy and learning from customers, and then trying to turn that into the 1.0 version of the product. when we're suddenly inheriting this enormous pile of technical debt. Because when we built that MVP, probably we were going super fast. We're using whatever tools come to hand. We're cobbling things together with chewing gum and baling wire. We're ignoring security. We're ignoring good coding practices and careful architecture of the systems in favor of being able to get something out there quickly, which you need to do. But now you can't maintain the product. You can't easily add new features. You can't adapt it to new kinds of back-end technologies or new code bases that you want to integrate into the system. It's an unmaintainable mess that's going to cause nightmares for you. And we all do it. Management says we're going to build a new version when we go to the 1.0 version of the product. I've said this, everyone said this, and then when the rubber hits the road, you end up promoting the prototype. So there's only two ways out of this. Actually have the intestinal fortitude to throw away the prototype and build the real thing from scratch the right way with proper practices, or build the prototype the right way from the ground up. It will take longer, it is more work, it's more effort, and it will save you later. But lots of companies have fallen apart when they just could never get that 1.0 version to work the way it needed to get and keep customers beyond those super excited, very early adopters. Number 7, poor product timing. There is a magic moment for any solution that is the perfect time to launch, that is in that Goldilocks moment when the market exists but is not yet flooded with other competitors. And it is almost impossible to exactly know when that's going to be. We all have pretty cloudy crystal balls, and of course, knowing it is right now is too late to start your company. You needed to have started your company before. If you're too early to the market, the customers won't get what you're doing, and you're going to wallow and burn through your capital while you're trying to attract people who aren't ready to buy yet. I made this exact mistake when I launched Anonymizer back in 1995. We were doing consumer internet privacy, and the World Wide Web had only been invented in, I think, 91, 92. So I'd go out and say, hey, you need to be thinking about privacy on the internet. And the response was, wow, tell me about this internet thing. Fortunately, I had set up the company with bootstrapping in mind early on. I had multiple other non-privacy related revenue streams, which allowed me to continue to build out the product and survive and experiment while awareness came along. So when the internet started to get really hot into the late 90s, I was ready, we already had the product, and we could capitalize on that. But it's only because I had other sources of capital. People weren't going to invest in the company at that point because, at that early point, because there was no market for it, and they would have been totally correct to do so. The other mistake, of course, is coming in too late. You see an area is red hot, everyone's talking about it, you want to go launch a company into it. It then takes you, say, 3-6 months to get your MVP up and running, by which point everyone else has seen that this market is red hot and the space is just ridiculously crowded. I see this all the time. When an area gets hot, a couple of months later, suddenly every third deck that I see is an almost identical business plan. And you've now missed that window of opportunity. It's far, far harder to succeed from that late point when you're a startup coming from a standing start with minimal funding. So the key here, as with many things, is research. Making sure that you've looked at what are the market trends, what are the opportunities, how are things changing, talking to potential customers, both the very early adopters, but also maybe sort of the later term early adopters, to understand what is their level of interest in this. Do they understand the problem? Do they feel the pain point that you're trying to articulate in a way that would make them want to adopt this? Or maybe soon. So you're looking for those leading indicators that are saying that in, say, 6 months, this will really be where it's at, but also that when you're looking at who's out there, who's working on this, that there aren't 100 other startups in exactly your spot, right? You want to make sure that you're not that person who's going to be the last entrant into the race. Number 8, loss of focus. Focus is everything in your startup. You are so resource constrained. There is so much to do. If you put 100% of your time and effort, or 200% because you're hardly sleeping, into that laser focused area of activity, it's still incredibly challenging to run your startup. But if you start seeing opportunities everywhere, and you will see opportunities everywhere, and begin to chase and explore all of them, it sucks all the oxygen out of the room. It takes your eye off the ball, off that core activity. You're moving slower, you're building features that are of limited interest, you're exploring other sort of parallel areas that are not relevant to getting your core customers and delivering that value proposition that really matters to them. But there's that reality we've talked about that most startups pivot. So here's this mental paradox that you need to engage with. You need to be absolutely brutally focused on your core activities, on what's building your business, what's pursuing your strategy, and keeping an eye out for other opportunities that might in fact be far superior to the one you're pursuing now. But you can't put much effort into them, right? You don't want to suddenly go running off down some side alley and then discover that that was not actually greener grass, that was all poison oak, and now you've gotten devastated and you've spent a huge amount of time and money doing it. But you may want to be spending a tiny amount of time and money doing some strategic explorations, having discussions and interviews with customers in that direction, talking to them about those capabilities, running some little tests that would allow you to determine whether that really is greener field. And then the question is, how much retooling are you going to have to do to pivot? Because if it's a significant pivot, you're really giving up most of the work you've already put in. You're already some distance down your runway. Is that even a viable activity? So at the end of the day, you need to hold absolute focus and flexibility. You need to have strong convictions loosely held. Number 9, go-to-market failure. So you've got a working product. It's great. It delivers value. Your early adopter customers love it. They're happy to pay for it. They're telling all their friends. What could be wrong with that? Where are things going to go wrong? Well, there's 2 ways your go-to-market can kill you. And the first is you can't reach those customers at scale. So if you find that person at the moment they need your solution and articulate the value that you're providing, they'll buy it. Fantastic. But in many cases, there's only a narrow window of opportunity. There's a transition someone's making. Let's say it's new parents. You really need to nail them right before they give birth to that child if you're going to sell them things for neonatal children. And if you hit them 6 months before or 11 months before, completely irrelevant. 6 weeks later, they've already bought the thing. You need to reach them in that instant. And it may not be something that's easy to target. So, you can hit people of this age demographic, or you can hit existing parents, but in many cases your business needs to hit that narrow window, and there may be no way of doing it. So you can get your first couple dozen customers, maybe hundreds of customers, but you need to be able to get thousands or millions of customers, depending on whether you're B2B or B2C. Do you have the ability to hit them? And if you can't, then your growth is going to stall out. The other scenario that you can run into is, sure, they're out there, you can find them, you can target them. It's a real popular keyword though, and you can't afford to target them. You do some experiments, you start advertising, you start marketing, and it turns out that your customer acquisition costs are too high. Your CAC is higher than your lifetime value. That's never going to work out. And in fact, as a startup, you really need your payback on the CAC to be, say, 6 months or a year. Even 2 years is pretty unmanageable. But often you'll find that reaching those customers is simply too expensive. And so now, again, you can't scale because you can't afford the marketing that would scale, the methodologies for bringing in people that work beyond individual relationships or the social groups that you're already in, because that's the easy way to get those first handful of customers, but it won't get you to where the company needs to be to achieve a successful exit. So the key here is testing. Go out there and see, can you find those markets? Spend early money in small amounts to understand what is your CAC? Can you reach these people? Is that reasonably efficient? Do they convert? Things like that. And if either of those is turning out to be a problem, now you need to be reconsidering your whole go-to-market strategy. Maybe direct marketing is not the right way to go, but you can do a channel strategy because there's someone else who already has access to those people, either because they're pre-existing customers already and when they go through that transition, or they're an established brand and people are always going to go look at them for this thing. If that's a synergistic relationship, that is to say what you're selling doesn't compete with them, you can then piggyback on them potentially with a revenue share or some other kind of exchange to basically borrow their market and give you access to that space that you couldn't go after directly. But in any case, you need to know that your go-to-market strategy will work and will scale before you commit to your solution, or you need to find other ways of thinking about taking that path. Number 10, co-founder conflict. Building a startup by yourself is exponentially more difficult than building it with a partner or more than one partner. Not only do you have twice as many hands to do the work, but you also have someone else to bounce ideas off. You have other sources of inspiration, people to question your decisions, different perspectives on your customers and approaches. All of those are a huge help. But just like with a marriage, conflicts can happen. You're in a high pressure environment, you're spending a lot of time together, and things can go wrong. It may turn out that after a while you have fundamental differences about the direction of the company or the strategy you want to take, and you just can't come to an agreement on that and are going to end up breaking up over that issue. Or maybe one of you just can't afford to be a co-founder anymore, right? You're foregoing salaries and you all said, okay, we're going to give up salaries for 6 months. Well, you're now 18 months into the startup. They can't do this anymore. They have to go pay mortgage and put money aside for kids' college or things like that. So they may need to leave. It could be that just living with them in this pressure cooker for the last 18 months has gotten you to the point where you can't stand them. You hate each other's guts and you don't want to be in the same room. That's not conducive to a successful company. Once co-founders come into this kind of conflict, it can be hugely disruptive to the company. It's poisonous to all the rest of the team, your employees. And when one of the founders leaves, bad things happen, right? They typically are taking some huge chunk of equity. They're taking a third to a half of the company's ownership with them. And that poisons the well for future investors. People don't like to see gigantic chunks of debt equity on the cap table, but that person's probably not interested in renegotiating with you to walk away from that. They're also a key part of your team. So now you need to backfill them. And that can take a long time. That can kill the momentum in the company, right? Generally, it's very disruptive when that goes wrong. So how do you avoid this kind of co-founder conflict? Well, the first thing is make sure that you have working experience with them beforehand. Do some test driving if this is a new person. Work on some projects together before you really cement that co-founder relationship. Spend some time doing hard things. See how you work together. Is there mutual respect? Do you have the same sort of ideals and directions and are in alignment on the strategies that you're going to be pursuing? And then put this stuff down in writing. Make sure that everyone's lanes are really clear. Here's the kind of strategy we're pursuing. Here's where we're going about it. Here's how we're going to make decisions if we disagree. Here's how the tiebreaker happens. Who is the final word on all of these issues? What will happen if we run into differences or disagree or someone wants to leave the business? Can we buy that stock back at some reasonable price? I highly encourage you to vest everyone's stock from the get-go. So if in 6 months things go bad, they're not walking away with most of the company. In fact, in 6 months, they're probably walking away with nothing. In 18 months, there's still maybe only a quarter of what they would have gotten at the end of the day. That can prevent that huge drag on your cap table. And then make sure that you're not single person dependent as much as you can. I know it's really hard in a startup, but already be thinking about redundancy, who else you'd hire, warming people up, bringing in other team members who can back up the people you've got. Because even if the co-founders don't leave, you don't run into any of these co-founder difficulties. There's always the someone got hit by a bus problem. Before I move on to the zombie company issue, I'd love to hear from you about your experiences with startup failure. I think we spend way too much time admiring successful companies, and in many cases, I think they're not very clear on why their company was successful. Failure tends to be very specific. So whether you were the founder, co-founder, employee, investor, or just a spectator, I'd love to hear about what kinds of experiences you've had with startup failure and what you think caused it and we could learn from it. I think the community as a whole exploring this will be incredibly valuable. And finally, zombie corporations. These are companies that are able to bring in customers and achieve a certain level of success, be up and running, but growth stalls out. Typically, this is because they can't cross some sort of a chasm. They've got either, the extremely early adopters, but they can't get the later early adopters. Or very commonly, they've gotten the early adopters, people who are excited about new tech, but they can't move into the mainstream. People are not willing to take these switching costs, and the existing solutions are good enough for them. They're just generally conservative. They want to see more proof, but you can't deliver enough proof with just the early adopters, and things flatline. And once they start flatlining, typically it's harder to get growth, right? You don't have people willing to pump a whole bunch more capital into a stagnant company to help you create the value, the new features, the massive amount of marketing required to hit that next level, and things stay flat. The solution to this is to be thinking about those later adopters somewhat earlier in the company. You don't want to wait until you see that growth curve flatten out to start worrying about those later adopters. So about the time you're maybe a third to a half of the way into the early adopters, be starting to talk to those later people. Understand their psychology. Why is this different for them? What do you need to be doing to appease them, to make them excited about your solution, to make them, maybe more importantly, comfortable with your solution and understanding how this stands out? What levels of proof or establishment or maturity do they need to see to make this work? Are there third-party supports that they need to have in place? Start making sure that you're getting those lined up. So by the time you're starting to burn out of those early adopters, you have all the ducks in a row for the larger middle market, and that'll allow you to go from, say, that $10 million ARR to your hundreds of millions of dollars ARR as you expand into that big juicy steak of the middle of the market. Thanks for watching this episode. I hope you found it useful and interesting, and if so, do the usual: like, subscribe, ring that bell. I encourage you to now maybe go check out this episode over here on fast funding rejections. Most of the applications to my angel group and pitches that come to me directly get rejected in under a minute, probably over 90% of them. And so I'm not even taking a detailed look. There's a lot of reasons that you can end up in the trash bin after just a glance, and you should avoid them at all costs. At least make me work to say no to you. And until next time, ciao.